Hello, hello, and welcome to Cracking the Anxiety Code. I'm Dr. Caroline Buzanko with Koru Family Psychology. I have worked with children and teens and their families for almost 30 years. And I would say in all of this time, anxiety has definitely been the biggest challenge that I've been needing to work on. There's lots to go over, so let's dig in. The biggest reason why I'm so happy to have you join me is because anxiety is the most common mental health concern for children and adults. And there's been major increases over the past decade, even before COVID, but since COVID, it's tripled. And even before COVID, kids have been in the thick of an anxiety epidemic. And it's the leading reason why most of our kiddos end up in emergency rooms and hospitalizations is because of this anxiety. And one thing that's really important for us to remember is it's not something that they outgrow. We think it's just a phase, but it actually becomes more severe over time. It doesn't get better. And it's not just situational worries. This is anxiety that I'm talking about. It does get more severe when we're not doing anything about it. When we wait, it gets harder. Teens are extremely susceptible for developing anxiety, and there's so much more going on in their brains and in the world. It just becomes so much harder to manage. They still can manage it, but we want early intervention. We want prevention, really. That's what we want to do. Untreated anxiety is the leading predictor of depression in teens and young adults. And most of the difficulties that we see in adulthood, more than 70% of all mental health problems began in childhood and adolescence. And so it's really important that we get on this. The earlier, the better. When anxiety grows too big, it can impair students' functioning in all areas, even just managing routines, daily demands like getting up in the morning, choosing what to wear, going to school, playing on their own, even sleeping on their own can be affected. So all areas. And in the classroom, anxiety is an exceptionality that really needs to be addressed because it's affecting their learning. Worry takes up so much cognitive space that learning is superficial. And they're forgetting things. If even if it was like, you just knew this 5 minutes ago, why aren't you knowing it now? It's just not getting into their memory, which is a problem. And so their learning is superficial, and anxiety makes it hard to consolidate that learning, meaning they're not going to remember what information was from one day to the next. And then we start seeing students developing test anxiety. That's quite common. And we see just all of these different effects that it can have. It really limits their learning. We see low productivity, poor attention. They're working slowly. Maybe they start developing rituals of erasing and restarting and rechecking. And teacher, can you check for me? All of these problems start to happen. And we know it limits the executive functioning. Oftentimes, I see so many kids coming to me for, a psychoeducational assessment for potential ADHD, but it's so much anxiety. And anxiety looks like ADHD because I'm so worried. It's using up all of my cognitive resources. I can't get started on tasks. I can't sustain my attention to finish tasks. We see that anxiety can be really impairing. And so we see daily living, academics. Anxiety can really interfere with social success too. I see so many of younger boys, teenagers, but the younger boys, oftentimes it might come out as aggressive behaviors or in your face behaviors that can disrupt a lot of the relationships. For older girls and boys, that social anxiety can become so debilitating, often to the point that they don't even want to go to school. Before that school avoidance, we didn't see it so much in the younger grades, but we're seeing it so much more now. It was always a problem, but we're seeing it so much more now, where it's just easier to stay at home, or maybe they're going to school, but they're not going to their classes or all of their classes, or they're hanging out in the bathroom at lunchtime, even though they have friends. The anxiety, it makes it hard for them to go and try to find those friends. So just some considerations, right, that we're going to think about. It's just really impairing. It can be impairing their successful functioning. And that's just important to think about, especially because so many students go undetected for far too long and they're not getting the support they need. And even if they do go to get support, it's not the right sort of support. And we often see a lot of kids. So sometimes it'll come out as the aggressive behaviors, and then we think we've got a behavior problem. Other times, our anxious kids are just so quiet, they're so well behaved that they go unnoticed. And so nobody really notices it. Oh, no, they're so good, right? But they're just containing all of this anxiety. So we kind of see those differences, and I'll get into how that anxiety can manifest. But there is a silver lining. Even though we see so much anxiety, even though it's so prevalent, it is extremely treatable. It can be prevented. And when we know what we need to do and have the right tools, we can support these students. So that's why I'm so happy that you're here, because when you know what to do, especially in the classroom, you spend so much time with students every single day. You have a big role to play in supporting this anxiety. So I'm going to jump into the Anxiety Compass here. It's a program I've developed over the past 10 years it's based on evidence-based strategies for anxiety as well as clinical experience, but it's really pulling from evidence-based practices across disciplines and across, different modalities, which is really important. Now you'll see, even though I kind of go through it sequentially, there's some jumping back and forth depending on what we're doing. And I'm going to try to make this as practical as possible. Everything I talk about, even though we're here to talk about anxiety, it's really emotion regulation. So it doesn't really matter. Anything that we're talking about will work obviously for anxiety, but will also work for frustration tolerance, anger management, over the top silly, even when they're happy, those big silly behaviors. All of this is going to be helpful. There's different pieces that we need to work with. And I'll try to, break it down to class wide. Every single student can benefit from doing all of these things as well. We don't have to just focus on, those at risk or the anxious students. We really want to try to target everyone. Now, for understanding, this is kind of targeted specifically for anxiety, but it's understanding what anxiety is. I think we all have a good idea, but it's really good just to make sure that we're all on the same page. So we have this pre-built system in our brain to help protect us, right? We see something that's going to eat us and we're going to hopefully run away from it. If we have to face it and fight it, we will. That's the other piece. So this is a really simplified view. We see something scary here. In our brain, we've got that amygdala. We actually have two on either side. It's the size and shape of an almond. So we perceive that threat, we see the threat, and then all of these hormones, you can see those little orange things on top of our kidneys, sends out the adrenaline and all the chemicals that we need. It's the adrenal glands. That's what those things are. It starts up that fight or flight response. That's the body's way to prime itself to protect itself, either by, running away or fighting for its life to be able to survive. So we can't get rid of anxiety, and that's really important for us to know. Okay, we need to have it. We need to have that fear. We need to have that fight flight response. And so oftentimes we're trying to get rid of it, and students want it gone, and parents want it gone, and teachers want it gone. But we can't. And so then we start feeling helpless when the anxiety is not going away. But being human means we all feel worries at some point. We simply cannot avoid it. It's normal. And that's really important. It's normal and it's important for survival because it does protect us from danger when there really is danger. And if we are able to think about it in a certain way, we can use that adrenaline, we can use that energy to perform our best and to do the things that we need to do. We've heard of amazing feats that people have done by using that and channeling that energy. The problem, of course, is our brain hasn't changed much in 250,000 years, but society has changed so much, just even the past decade, in the past 20 years. I mean, our brain just hasn't been able to catch up to this system that was built to protect us. It was built to be anxious. Our brain is supposed to be anxious to be able to look out for all of the danger. Unfortunately, because of all the technologies and this, needing a quick fix all the time, it's actually killing us now in every aspect because of, eating habits and spending habits. We don't know how to cope with any emotions. And so we're turning to these harmful coping strategies, right? Because we just want that quick fix. You have a headache, take an Advil just to get rid of it right away. And then it reinforces the brain, but it's not helping in the long run. we're never learning the skills. If you're always just coming home at the end of a stressful day and grabbing a bottle of wine and watching Netflix, you're never learning to cope, and you get into a cycle and you get into that habit. And that's where we see the problem. So I just want to quickly look at what normal worries versus anxiety is, right? The helpful versus unhelpful, the maladaptive that's getting in the way. So worries are to be expected, especially worries that are used for survival, right? So, when we're little, it makes sense that there's some separation anxiety because we're separating from the adults that we know are there to protect us, right? Being scared of heights, that makes sense because it could harm us if we fall. Things that could eat us, that makes sense that we're going to be a little bit worried about them. So we see these developmentally appropriate fears to ensure our safety. Certainly life transitions, going to new schools. My daughter is in grade 12 right now. And so this is actually one of the most stressful transitions in our life, is from grade 12 going into adulthood. So that makes sense. It's going to cause worry. Starting a new job, changes in family composition, starting a new relationship, those can all, create a little bit of anxiety. And then, of course, anything unfamiliar because we don't know what to expect, or any stressful situations that you've been in, that makes sense. Here's a little bit more specific worries depending on the ages that we can expect. So these are appropriate worries depending on the age. It makes sense, again, that toddlers are going to worry about that separation. As they get older, maybe it's a little bit more monsters and shadows and ghosts. By the time they hit teenage years, social anxiety is so big. And it could be social, just how do I interact with other people? And do I ask that person out? But it could be school performance as well, right? Anything that we're going to be graded on or judged on. They also start thinking about their own mortality. The social anxiety, though, is the number one anxiety that we feel as a species. Because if you didn't belong to a tribe, you would die, right? Like, think of the Croods, if you've ever seen that Disney movie. If you weren't part of the caveman tribe, you were going to get eaten, or the elements were going to get you. You needed to belong to a group. And so that's why we feel it so strongly. So these are the things that we need to remember, right? When we're looking at healthy, normal worries. Worries are temporary. They're to be expected, first of all, and they're temporary when they do show up. They're not interfering with kids functioning. They can still go and live life. They can still go to school. They can still put up their hand. They can still go on the school bus. They can still do those things. So everyone experiences anxiety and worries, and they can actually be helpful. So why is it a problem? Why are we here, right? When does worries become a problem? Well, we know worries are normal when there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. Anxiety becomes a disorder when there is no end. That amygdala, it's overactive, and it's setting off these false alarms all the time. It's just ringing and ringing and ringing, and we're always in this fight flight, even when there's no immediate danger. And so that's when we start to say, okay, something's going on here. Now we need to really address this. But even managing normal worries is going to be important for anybody. I love metaphors and analogies. It's really helpful for kids. And one that I love using is that faulty fire alarm, right? When we burn a piece of toast or we burn some food, when we're making dinner, we have to have that fire alarm in the house. It's super annoying when it goes off when we're just making toast, but we need to have it if there's a real fire. Okay, so it's like that, you're so annoying, amygdala, setting off my fight flight when it's just I'm waiting for a text, right? It's being able to recognize you're so annoying. And what would we do if it was a false alarm in the house? We would probably go under it. We'd be waving something. We'd be opening the doors and opening windows just to let it air out, right? When it's happening in the brain, though, we pick up on it. Emergency, emergency, emergency. So just like that fire alarm in our house, it can't tell the difference if it's a real fire or not. It can't tell the difference. And so same thing with our amygdala. It's always going to respond like it's an emergency. So because the brain can't tell a difference, if it's a real threat or just a thought, either way, that amygdala is triggered. And so our body is going to be alerted. It's going to jump into protective mode. So just expecting something bad to happen is enough to set off those alarms in our amygdala. And then that's why we see big emotional reactions. It could be an anger, explosive sort of emotional behavior, or avoidance, or fighting, or just crying, right? Because our amygdala says danger and we're coming out, we're reacting instantaneously. There's no rational thoughts. We're just sucked into it. Once that alarm goes off, the blood flows out of the prefrontal cortex. That's job is to tell that false alarm, it's okay, it's not a big deal, right? But there's no blood flow. Literally, the Wi-Fi is shut off. And so that thinking and decision-making part of our brain is short-circuited. And so we really need to focus on that. So worries become problematic when it starts to show up when there's no danger and kids are just continuously worrying themselves, right? They're just re-triggering it over and over and over. And then it leads to physical symptoms, which I'm going to talk about. That just creates even more anxiety. Now, I take a transdiagnostic approach where anxiety is anxiety is anxiety. It doesn't matter, what the specific label is. I know psychologists are always giving labels and coding, you might need to have labels for coding, but there's so much overlap anyway. So there are specific phobias. Some kids might be scared of dentists or needles, right? Some are scared of going to school. Some are scared to hang out with other kids. Some are scared of doing anything in front of others, like putting their hand up, or just worried about being embarrassed. Some are just scared of everything. So we need to look at all of this. It doesn't really matter. Those labels aren't really helpful. We need to understand what anxiety is. So anxiety is essentially we get sucked in to it, whatever it is, whatever the situation is, it becomes too much and we become so overwhelmed and we believe that I can't handle it. That is point number one that you must remember. Anxiety is the belief that I can't handle it, whatever it is. And so we respond to stress based on how we perceive those demands, i.e., I can't do it. So I'm going to give up, I'm going to run away, I'm going to yell, I'm going to scream, I'm going to do whatever I can to get away because I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what that outcome is going to be. Right? And so I can't handle the uncertainty. So let's just quickly look at the many phases of anxiety and how it manifests. It does look very different from one student to another. So the other thing we also want to remember is some students are affected in one part of their life or in one class, right? It could be intermittently, but then there's other students who are just burdened all day long. They just don't have a moment of reprieve. But some kids, it might be math class is stressful, but every other class is fine, or gym class and music class are too overstimulating and stressful. Other classes are fine. So we just need to kind of take a look at that. Now, anxiety is an emotion that is felt in the body. So affect is huge. A lot of students don't notice it as nervousness. They don't notice it as anxiety. They notice the physical symptoms like feeling sick or feeling headachy, feeling chest pains, feeling tense muscles. I have so many bright teenagers even who are like, it's not anxiety. I don't know why I'm here to see you, Caroline. I don't need a psychologist. I need a medical doctor because I know that I'm dying of kidney cancer, right? And so they just really see those physical symptoms as something medical. And COVID really highlighted that even more. Oh my gosh, you have a runny nose. You got to stay at home. So we're just really highlighting those symptoms even more. We can also see some things too, like toileting accidents, right? Poor sleep, finger sucking, but a lot of school avoidance because I'm feeling sick, I need to stay home. But we need to understand, and students need to understand what's happening in their body. So we can say, oh man, that's terrible that you've got a stomach ache. It totally makes sense. You're about to do your presentation and I know exactly why you've got a stomach ache. Let's go through, right? So we got to think when our body, when that amygdala is rung, our body is revving up to take action. So when it's revving up, we need blood to our big muscles as fast as possible, to our legs, to our arms as fast as possible. And so we need lots more blood and oxygen to be pumped. So if we need blood fast to those big muscles, our heart's going to start beating faster. So of course, we might feel pressure there. We're going to feel that increased heart rate, right? It's getting that power to be able to protect ourselves. So it's got to pump that blood. That's why our heart starts beating faster. Our breathing has to get faster too, because we have to send more oxygen around the body fast. And when we start breathing too fast or too deep, right, you're going to feel a little achy. You might feel a little lightheaded. You might even feel like you're starting to hyperventilate. But we got to remember, it's not dangerous. It's your body's way of getting you ready to protect itself. It doesn't know that you're just going up for a presentation. It thinks that you were facing a saber-toothed tiger who's about to eat you. No wonder you feel that way. That makes sense. We want to normalize this. Now, anything that's not going to help us fight or flight is not going to, it's going to shut down. We don't need it right now. It's going to go into rest mode. So, digestion doesn't help us. And so chemicals are going to be put into our stomach to, in case there's food in there, to digest later, right? So our digestive system slows down because our energy needs to go deal with the danger. So if you're not digesting any food in there, you might have a sore, upset stomach, right? Because maybe the food's there, it's going to sit in stomach acid, so it can get digested later on. No wonder you feel sick. This is what's happening in your body, right? We want to make sure they know and we know so we can normalize it and not, reinforce that, oh my gosh, you got to go home. We often see lots of skin problems. We might see a rash. Younger kids, I see a lot more eczema as they get older, lots of oily skin, acne. The skin gets really sensitive and oily. And when our body's revving up, obviously, we might get sweaty as well. Our bladder, I mean, it's going to want to get rid of any urine that's in there, right? Same thing with our bowels. It just wants to get rid of anything that's going to slow us down. It just wants to get rid of it all. So you might have a student who feels like they need to go to the bathroom all the time, and that makes sense. And just a tip around that, a 6-second pee is a good length of pee. Anything shorter than 6 seconds, they didn't actually need to go. And so I have seen so many difficulties with students going to the bathroom too often. They're actually irritating their bladder, and it's actually causing more problems, and they're losing touch with what their body signals are. And so we got to watch that. So 6 second is a good pee rule. If it's way longer than that, they're probably holding it too much. Our muscles tense up, right, to prepare to run away and fight. And so especially our thigh muscles and our arm muscles. Okay, so we're going to feel that tension because all of the blood is going there. But our extremities, the blood is moving out of our extremities. So they might feel cold, they might feel tingly, they might feel numb. So those are things to remember. When we're in danger, our pupils get bigger so we can take in more light, so we can spot danger more easily, right? So oftentimes kids will start seeing things that aren't even there. It'll be like hallucinations, especially at bedtime, right? In the dark, they're sure that there's a monster there. Or they might see black spots or other weird things, which is really normal. That makes sense. This is what your eyes are doing. It's trying to take in more light. When our pupils are so dilated, like every little thing we're going to pick up on, even things that are out of our subconscious that we might not realize. Our mouth might also go dry, and it might feel like we can't talk, right? Or we can't swallow, because saliva is not going to help us with anything. So those physical symptoms are a really big problem, because anxiety often gets worse. When we're starting to worry about feeling all of these physical feelings, the feelings are distressing and students want them to stop. And then with things like COVID, we're like, oh my gosh, right? It's got to stop. So we got to be really careful with all of these things. So what's important for us to know and students to know is that everything that happens in our body is normal. It definitely feels uncomfortable. So we can validate that. Yeah, it sucks. It's terrible to have that stomach ache, but it's not dangerous, because all of these things are meant to protect us. It doesn't make sense that it would be dangerous, right? Even if you feel like you're going to throw up or pass out or stop breathing, your body's not going to let you do that. Those feelings are there to protect you. So it's really important that they remember that if there really was a danger, like a bear chasing us, all of these things would be super important so that we could get ourselves out of that danger. But if there is no danger and we're just trying to sit down to take a test, no wonder it's going to feel really uncomfortable, but we can use this energy so we can focus on our test and do our best, right? So I think that that's really important. The other thing that we could say, everything that happens here in our body is very similar to what happens in our body when we're excited about something. But how we think about these things is very different. If we're excited, we're not going to worry about our stomach, right? We're going to feel it, but we're going to think differently about it. So we want to be able to use that energy, just like if we were super excited about something. That's going to be really important. Now, I'm going to be talking about how we can't get rid of anxiety, but there's a lot of things that It wouldn't make sense to try to sit down and breathe. Just sit down and breathe. If your amygdala doesn't know that there's not danger, it doesn't make sense. It's just going to get more stressed out. Why are you trying to sit down and breathe? You need to be up and running away from this danger. The only one hack that I would say is shaking, right? So if you just got up, like, so at the beginning of every class, just shake out, younger kids, it's shaking out your sillies. For older ones, it's just, just shaking, whatever it is, doing some jumping jacks. That shaking helps release the tension buildup. I know, my daughter, at the time of this filming, I have to film in January for a teachers convention, and my daughter's going through her diploma exams right now. If you're overseeing those diplomas, let the students, like, just get them to shake it out a little bit. You see boxers coming out and shaking, right? It just helps relieve some of that tension. It's the body's way of letting go. If you've ever been in a close call, like a close car accident, or you've almost been in an accident, afterwards you're probably shaking. That's your nervous system's way of calming itself, calming itself down. So that's just a quick little hack. Shake on purpose and exaggerate it just to discharge some of that nervous energy. Now, anxiety also shows up in our thoughts, right? It primes us to recognize danger even when none is there. Any uncertain situation, anxious students are automatically going to interpret it as negative. Kids are really creative, and the worries often get the better of them. So they start to develop these ideas that they're going to mess up or that everyone's going to laugh at them. And so they start worrying about something that's going to happen in the future. And it can be really unrealistic and extreme. But the rational thinking brain the Wi-Fi has gone offline, right? So there's these things, and it could even be subtle things like I'm scared that I'm going to get yelled at, right? It doesn't even have to be a big scary thing. Now, those thoughts lead to behaviors. It's the belief I can't handle the situation. I'm not capable of doing it. And so we see behaviors. It could be dependency behaviors. I need to sleep with you. I can't do it on my own, right? Or I need to have someone walk me to the bathroom. I can't go on my own. So we might see a regression in skills, even with teenagers, right? Where we might see some over clinginess with any age, constantly seeking reassurance that I look okay, that my homework is okay, right? That I'm going to be okay when I go to school, that I'm not going to throw up. So they're looking for all of those things. Or I need you, mom and dad, to order my food at a restaurant. There might be lots of questions, repetitive questions. Are you sure everything's going to be okay? What time are you going to be home? Do you have your phone? What's your battery charge on your phone? Make sure, are you going to be able to answer your phone? Do you have any meetings today? So I know exactly if I need to text you that you're going to be able to respond right away, right? Are you sure that it's just on and on and on? So there's so many things. Now we have two types of behaviors. One are the internalizers. They're the ones who might cry. They might beat themselves up quietly, right? Self-deprecating, they're withdrawn. We might see eating problems, sleeping problems, poor attention, disorganization. It's really, they're increasing their own distress, those internalizers. The externalizers, they increase everybody else's distress because of their acting out behaviors. Anxious kids are so easily triggered, and they're asking lots of questions related to those, worries, or, it could be the aggressor. I don't want to be vulnerable and embarrassed in front of class. So it's better for me to be angry and chuck my pencil, right? I'd rather be known as the tough kid than the scaredy cat kid. So we see these types of behaviors. We know anxiety is a combination of genetics and the environment when we're looking at causes. I'm not going to go into this because it really doesn't matter. I don't really care about the causes so much. I am going to talk a little bit about contributors, but I do just want to say we are ancestors of anxious people. We are all just predisposed to anxiety. It's part of being human. The reason why we are here on this planet today is because of our ancestors who were anxious and were able to beat the elements and the things that ate them. So we are all predisposed to anxiety. When anxiety is a problem, it's because something is happening in our environment that's making that anxiety a problem. It might be adults who are modeling anxious behaviors. It might be students who are receiving accommodations that are making their anxiety worse. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about that.